this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are offering 5 conversations from episode 12, our review of the ICER draft evidence report on resmetirom and obeticholic acid. And from the vault, we have conversation 16.1 from season 3, in which Chris Estes, who was then the lead modeler for the CDA Foundation, joined Jorn Schattenberg, Louise Campbell, guest Alina Allen, and me to discuss some of the challenges in building a model for a disease with a long progression path and measurable levels of spontaneous regression. It's an issue that arose during the ICER discussion, but with a very different spin, so you'll probably want to listen to all of this to get a feel for how it hangs together. First-time surfer Hannah Mamuszka, whose consulting firm specializes in assessing and demonstrating the value of diagnostics, kicks this conversation off by noting similarities between NASH and Alzheimer's disease, both being progressive diseases that lack robust, wide-accepted diagnostics, in which large patient populations progress at different rates, exhibit different levels of risk, and respond to drugs in different ways. She also suggests that the report downplays the challenge of NAFLD and NASH by failing to discuss links to obesogenic cancers and underestimating the size of the target population. Jorn Schattenberg concurs. Louise Campbell suggests that while the title focused solely on NASH, the document itself discussed both NASH and NAFLD, which, as she puts it, muddies the water. She shares other concerns about the language in the document and questions whether a single study can achieve and address an issue of this scope. Hannah goes back to some fundamental questions on how the U.S. assesses healthcare. We do not particularly focus on quality, so we do not use qualities the way they do in Europe. We ask for diagnostic tests to demonstrate clinical utility, that is, to change treatment patterns, so we do not value diagnostics for diseases without efficacious therapeutics. All this leads to the idea that we cannot estimate the target population reliably, nor the nature of their need. Jeff McIntyre notes that ICER uses a quality-based model and assigns a number based on the quality model, which has pluses and minuses. As the conversation closes, Hannah notes that commercial payers look not at qualities, but solely economic impact, and this document understates some important indirect economic costs. While ICER is a private organization, its recommendations carry weight with those assessing the value and pricing of new medications. This report will leave a significant footprint in commercial space, so just sit back, listen, enjoy, learn, and when you're done, join the dialogue on our LinkedIn discussion group.
Hannah Mamuszka.
The ICER report to me really missed a number of different points. I think of NASH in a lot of ways as being analogous to the same problem clinically we have in Alzheimer's disease, right? We have this big patient population with a myriad of symptoms. Like in oncology, it's probably a heterogeneous disease. People respond to different drugs in different ways. People have different rates of progression. People have different rates of risk or different types of risk. We don't have good diagnostic tools. I think the report really understates the problem of the size of the population that we're talking about. It doesn't take into the consideration the data showing the broader link, not just to cardiovascular disease and liver cancer, but more broadly to the entire class of obesogenic cancers. American Cancer Society put out a report last week showing the increasing rates of colon cancer in a demographic that absolutely overlaps with the NASH risk population. None of that is sort of taken into account in this report and this population. And it also, the lack of understanding around the progressiveness of NAFLD and NASH, I think it doesn't show the seriousness of the problem that we are about to encounter in the US. The US is really about to have such a substantial problem, particularly in the millennial population and some of the Gen X population, which is the heaviest population we've had in the US. We are not bothering to identify, risk stratify. Maybe some of these patients are asymptomatic. Maybe some of them are symptomatic, but they don't realize what their symptoms are. They don't realize that their symptoms are actually really significantly a liver problem that may contribute to earlier mortality for them. I think the report really downplays the risk and the seriousness in just taking a look at the relatively, frankly, low response rates of these drugs for such a significant problem.
Jorn Schattenberg.
Let me just follow up, Hannah. I think you put it well in terms of downplay. It feels like those people are knowledgeable about the disease, but they fail to highlight the severity of the disease and the reality of developing serious complications in some patients. That's by downplaying you. That's how you phrased that nicely. That's how it feels to me too.
Louise Campbell.
Just from an observational point of view, because obviously we've been through this with NICE recently with the FibroScan, and I'm struck by my inner Ian Rowe in the fact that there is only one question, and that was the title, Resmetirom and obeticholic acid in NASH. I got a sense of trying to muddy the water by bringing in NAFLD. We should not have been looking, if that was the title and the single object, we should only have been looking at NASH and the definition of that, because it wasn't clear to me whether there was only two spectrums they were looking at: simple steatosis with non-progression and NASH as being two separate entities. If you're going to keep it as two separate entities, then one should not have been in this dialogue. It should have been purely answer the question that the title is about, the same as NICE would do. They would be that specific. I think from my concerns, the language surprised me. The executive summary was very negative and resistant, almost to why have we been asked to put this question forward. Now, I don't know ICER. It's not my frame of reference as to whether this would be very early in the timeline of any medication, purely because of pressure with the numbers. If you look at the recent article that Naeem and colleagues published, they estimate 9 million Americans with NASH. So when we talk about underplaying the topic that Hannah was talking about, that's the type of numbers that they're predicting. But for me, the language, but when you use a comment, and I think I marked it down, whereby you're only looking for drugs that are quite safe, that is a real concern to me. We do not assess drugs only to be quite safe. We really assess drugs to be really safe. So there was a lot of difficulty in the communication and the language used throughout the report to me. And I think Jeff summed it up very well in the context that they talk about non-progression and then actually prove progression, and look at qualies about how you save progression to a disease and you avoid disease. So this complete opposite language throughout this document was a little bit concerning. And I think I agree with everything that everybody said. And you can't do a cost-effective analysis on one particular disease that affects so many diseases and not look at socioeconomic work. Just one comment on signs and symptoms. There was a very good piece done by the insurance companies a few years ago on the amount of time somebody with NAFLD presents to a primary care physician before they get a diagnosis. So there are symptoms. There are a lot of symptoms for everybody. They're just not diagnosed. Now, that is due to our inability to diagnose because we think people are just hypochondriacs, just coming repeatedly to get time off work. So do not blame the patient for the system failures in diagnosis. This is what the document raised for me several levels, but it's not my reference frame. Being English, we've got NICE as a different way.
Well, I mean, in the US, we also don't use qualities. Our healthcare system is not about quality, so we don't use quality metrics as a way of making decisions. But one of the reasons also that we don't have diagnostics so that the PCP can figure out when you present with those symptoms is because in the US, we have a system where a diagnostic has to demonstrate what's called clinical utility in order for it to be reimbursed by Medicare and commercial insurance. And part of clinical utility is what are you doing as a physician when you order the test and you get that result? What are you doing to change the management of the patient? So it's this chicken and egg situation where because there's no therapy and because Medicare and payers don't consider lifestyle modification to be a change in management, there's no utility in actually diagnosing patients. And so this report doesn't really acknowledge the fact that we don't really have an idea of how many patients we're talking about because we don't have those tools to figure out when the patient either has symptoms or has liver function tests that would suggest that they may have NASH. We don't have a way to bother to take that next step.
Jeff McIntyre.
I would say that there is one place, however, even in this document, Hannah, where quality does come in. And as the economist, you're probably uniquely qualified to talk about this. And that is the quality adjusted life years. And so, yeah, the health system does not take into account quality. I totally agree with that. But yet we do have this sort of model set up that ICER uses of quality adjusted life years, which is, it's tricky, because ultimately at the end of that, they're assigning a number to this. And it concerns me because I think that the qualities can be used by payers to discriminate and deny care to patients who really don't have scores that the payers might seem worth it. And their use of modeling of this in the report and the assumptions that drive them can certainly be very concerning.
Yeah, I mean, commercial payers in the U.S. do not take qualities this into account when they consider whether or not they're going to pay for a drug. I think what they're really looking for and what they're going to be looking for with these two drugs is what is the size of the patient population and what is going to be the effect of coverage in terms of how many patients are we going to prevent from progressing to liver transplant, how many patients are we going to keep out of the hospital with chronic events. And I think this analysis misses a lot of the actual potential cost savings of an effective drug.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. We'll be back next week to preview May's second annual Innovations in NAFLD Care Conference with co-host Jorn Schattenberg, who's a regular here, as you know, and Jeff Lazarus, who's not. Until then, stay safe, surf on, and we'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.